Hi guys, welcome back to GarageTech. In this video, I want to give you some hints and tips on how to store your car over the winter period. Now, we're coming into winter and I'm sure many of you are thinking, if you haven't already, about putting your car away for winter over those winter periods so we can get it out back in the spring. So I just want to take you through a few things on what to do to store your car and what you need to think about. So for me, really, there's five key things you want to be thinking about, which is your body and the condition of the exterior of the car, your tyres, brakes, engine, and then of course your battery. So I'm going to talk about those five things because they are my key things that I look to make sure is in tip-top condition before I start putting the car away for winter storage. So obviously with the bodywork and the condition of the car, ideally first you're probably going to want to give the car a wash, make sure it's nice and clean. So that way then when it comes to spring and you're taking your car out, you don't need to mess around with washing it for the first time, etc. You can just give it a quick wipe down and the car is ready to go. What I would say is though, if you are going to wash your car before you put it away, make sure the car is nice and dry, particularly the brakes and stuff like that. So take the car for a drive around the block first before you then wash the car and put it into storage. The other thing to consider is, are you going to be putting a car cover on your car? Are you going to be storing your car outside, or are you going to be storing it in a garage? Luckily for me, I've got a garage to store my car in. I do also have a car cover which I put on the car as well. That just helps to prevent any of the dust and stuff like that getting on the car, and if you are doing other bits and pieces in your garage, etc. If you're storing your car outside, obviously I would highly recommend a cover because it does try and just keeps the wet and the rain and stuff like that off of the car and some of the frost, etc. But it's something to really consider is actually where you're going to be storing your car over the winter period, because there are probably a few bits and pieces you're going to want to do just to try and keep it in tip-top condition, whether that's either charging the battery, sorting the tyres out, etc. So once you know where obviously you're going to store your car, if you're going to have a cover on it, just a couple other things to consider as well. I always make sure I give the interior a good clean, particularly around things like the steering wheel, the gear knob, sometimes the seat belts, and just those touch points that you touch most of the time when you're inside the car. If you're leaving your car for a long period of time and it's quite damp, then you do tend to find sometimes it's quite quick for mold and stuff like that to grow, particularly on like your seat belts and gear knobs and steering wheels. So give those a good wipe down before you put the car away as well. Some of the other things that I also do as well, because I'm keeping my car inside and I'm going to have a cover on it, I also drop the windows down and keep the windows open. Now do that just to allow the air to circulate around. That just helps to prevent it getting that musky type of smell inside the car if you're not going to be using it for a long time, and also helps to prevent some of that mold growing. The other thing to consider as well, where your car is going to be stored because of rodent damage. Now that might be some mice getting inside the car. They love to get inside the engine bay and make a little home in there. You'll see them, they bring nuts and stuff and bits and pieces like that. And if sometimes when you're then doing work later on in the year, you'll notice there's some little chew marks and mouse poo and stuff like that around inside the engine bay. So if you know you're going to be putting it in an area where there's potentially going to be mice, putting a few mouse traps and things around will also just help to prevent those mice get inside somewhere inside the car. The funniest one, or the worst one I've seen was an Audi R8, where this particular owner had their R8 stored in their garage, and they had the dog food in there as well, and this mice has then got all the dog biscuits and put it all inside the car. So it's really funny. And that particular owner then went to his car to take it out, couldn't release his handbrake, and then there was a load of dog biscuits that were stuck underneath it. So it's just something to consider because they can cause quite a bit of damage if they are then getting inside, and they love to chew through wiring harnesses and vacuum hoses and bits and pieces like that. So something else to consider there. Next then, let's have a think about your tyres. So obviously, ideally what you need to be doing is rotating the tyres probably every 30 days just to try and avoid getting those flat spots. Now, obviously the modern vehicles with newer tyres are not so bad and not so prone to developing flat spots when they've been sat for a period of time, but there are some things you can do to help try and prevent that even further. You can get these little chock plates that you stick underneath the actual wheels that help try and prevent flat spots. The other thing to do is then just inflate your tyre pressures kind of up to the maximum pressure. So depending on the tyre, it will tell you the maximum pressure on the sidewall of the tyre, so look out for that. But it's normally around anywhere between 3 to 3.5 bar or 50 psi. So that's something you can do, is pump those tyre pressures right up. Depending on what pump you're using, obviously those little handheld ones that you sometimes get with the cars, They might struggle to get all the way up to that pressure, but I would just say if you are going to store it, just pump your tyre pressures up to as much as you can with those, and then obviously every kind of 30 days or so just check your tyre pressures as well. Now if you can, and you've got the availability to rotate your tyres, because you're going to be storing your car for a longer period of time, that's another good thing you could do. Just rotate the tyres by 180 degrees. It's no good just rolling your car out and then back in again, because ultimately all you're going to be doing is putting the tyres back into the exact same spot. But if you've got a larger garage, because some of you may have a longer, deeper garage, then you may be able to just push the car back a few feet, so at least then the wheels all can kind of rotate round a bit. So that will help as well. Alternatively, you can then just jack your car up. That's what I tend to do. Makes things a bit easier, because then you can just mess around, get underneath and do a few bits and pieces and stuff like that. So if you can jack the car up, that's even better, because at least then potentially you might want to actually just take the wheels off, give them a deep clean, etc. So think about your tyres. That's one thing you could be doing there. Again, then thinking about your brakes. Obviously, as I said, make sure your brakes and stuff are dry before you store your car away, because the last thing you want is then rust getting in and seeping in onto your brake discs and then going really rusty. The other thing you want to also consider then is your handbrake. So make sure that you're storing your car with the handbrake released, so it's not on, so that way then the brakes won't bind on over that period of time. So if you can, just either put the car into neutral, from neutral into one of the gears. So I normally stick it into like third or something. It doesn't really matter, as long as the car's not going to roll away. And then you can stick a chock or a bit of wood or something underneath the wheel. That'll just stop the car from rolling away. Obviously, if you've got an auto or automatic, then you just put the car into park, and then that way then you won't need to worry about having the handbrake on. The other thing to consider then as well then is your battery. So depending on obviously where you're storing your car, you need to ideally put a battery charger on, or one of those trickle chargers. So I've got one of these C-Techs, looks like this. So I've got one of these, I put it on and I leave it on all the time pretty much. Now if you are worried about leaving that type of charger on all of the time, then what you can do, and what I have done before previously when I haven't had the option of having a charger to put it on all the time, is I'll just disconnect the battery. Obviously, sometimes the disadvantage about disconnecting the battery is, and depending on what car you've got, you may lose some certain settings in the car. So like your electric windows, the basic settings for that, steering wheel angle sensor, sometimes that will go out. It's quite easy to reset those. Generally, all you need to do is drive the car in a straight line and then turn the wheel full lock left, full lock right, and then back in a straight line again, and it'll typically reset that. But just be mindful of that. And also other things like radio codes. So some of the older cars may have a radio code, and sometimes it will knock that out. And if you haven't got your radio code, you might need to go to your local dealer to get the radio code. So just consider that, but it does actually save the battery quite a bit just by disconnecting the battery. That way then you're not going to have any drain on the battery in that time. Other things to then consider as well on the exterior of the car. Obviously I mentioned the car cover, but something else that I do is just put bits of sponge like this underneath the actual wipers. So it's pretty simple to do, just a little bit of sponge, and just lift the wipers up, put them under like that. And again, the same for the other side. And that then just means that you're not going to get a lot of wear on the actual rubber on the wiper blade itself, because obviously every time it's sat there just down like that, it's you know, wearing that rubber down. So just putting that bit of sponge underneath there just allows them to take a bit of pressure off the actual wiper blades. It's just going to prolong the life of the wiper blades. Now obviously you can just put the wipers up if you want, but if you're putting a car cover over the top, then obviously you're not going to be able to do that. But I would just say, just be mindful, because if you are going to leave the wipers up in that up position, just be careful, because if you do knock them, they do come down with a bit of a bang, and I have seen it where they've smashed screens before, so just be careful with that one. I suppose the last and kind of final thing we want to think about then is your engine, and you know, how often should you be going out and starting your engine, etc. Obviously a lot of the modern cars now, they can go for quite a long period of time without having to be started up and run, etc. But most manufacturers would recommend that you start the car up at least every 30 days. So I'll leave that down to you guys as to how you want to do it. But I mean, ultimately, I've left it longer than 30 days on cars before, and sometimes you know, I'll start the car more regular. It just depends on how accessible it is to get to the car and run it up, etc. If you've got to then move things out of the way or push the car out, because you don't want to be running the car up in a closed garage like this, because obviously you're going to just poison yourself to death. So every kind of 30 days. If you can run the car up, that's great. Run it for at least 5 minutes as a minimum, because you want to get the car up to at least a normal operating temperature. If you can do that, that's great. Alternatively, if you can't do that, you can't run it up, you know, there are ways to just crank the engine over. If you remove the fuse for the fuel injectors, for example, that way then you can at least crank the engine over, and at least you know you're going to get some form of oil circulation, just to get a bit of oil around the engine. So they're kind of my top tips in terms of storing your car over the winter period. Just remember some of those. You know, think about the bodywork and the condition, give it a good clean. Think about your tyres, think about your battery, think about your engine, and then your brakes as well. So they're kind of my 5 tips, just to try and keep your car nice and clean and ready. So when it comes to spring, you're good to go and you can get driving straight away. Okay then guys, well, thanks for watching. If you like these videos, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.